is up, you guys? It's a new week, so you know what that means. It's a new episode. And this episode is strictly and only going to be about the college football playoff. Yes, the final rankings have dropped. We're about to talk about the top 4 teams, how Florida State did get screwed in this college football playoff, what I think the perspective was of the committee when they made these decisions. This conversation is going to be good. I promise you. It's only going to be about college football playoff. So get ready, stay tuned, lock in, because we're about to get into it. If you missed Selection Sunday, you missed something, because I feel like everyone was glued to their TV, their phones, whatever, to figure out what these rankings were going to be. At number 1, we have Michigan. That was expected. That was a lock. Number 2, we have Washington. 3, we had Texas. Number 4, we had Alabama. That number 4 spot is where everyone was kind of at the edge of their seat to figure out what was going to happen. I'm going to tell you this right now. 2 things can be true at times in certain situations. This is a situation where I think 2 things are true, right? Number 1 is that Florida State did get screwed. They're undefeated. They win their conference, and they go from 4 to 5. And then Georgia goes to 6. The second thing that I can say is that I think the 4 teams that are in the college football playoff are better than Florida State currently, right now, at this moment, with them having their backup quarterback. The thing that I want to give people that are really outraged that Florida State is out, which I 100% understand and get, why it sucks, because it does. You do everything right. Everyone tells you control what you can control, win your games, win your conference, we'll get in. That's what you're told. Wins and losses matter in the sport. That's all that matters in a sense, right? And we're not rewarding a team that is undefeated because of injury. My thing to everyone would be that is very just calling this a travesty and an abomination of the sport. If I gave you a sheet of paper and said to you, pick out of these matchups, Florida State versus Michigan, Florida State versus Washington, Florida State versus Texas, Florida State versus Alabama, Florida State versus Georgia. If I gave you a sheet of paper with those options, you had to pick out of that matchup, Florida State being the constant in those options. I do not believe that paper would come back to me with an overall confidence score of people believing that Florida State could beat any of the other 5 teams currently. It's a different conversation when Jordan Travis is in it, and I hate that it had to be that. The college football playoff, they kind of leaked their bylaws or tried to make it more of a central focus, that nowhere in the bylaws that it says that you have to be undefeated to get in. And also stating that when they're considering who gets in, they are looking at key injuries and if it affects the team. This is a different conversation if Florida State loses a wide receiver. If it's Keon Coleman, I don't think everyone's going to sit there and say, whoa, wait a minute. You know? Defensive player, which Florida State is an amazing defensive team, top in the country. Won them that game against Louisville because they only had about 55 yards passing the ball with their 3rd string quarterback. But when I'm looking at Florida State with one of the most important positions, if not the most important position in football, which is the quarterback, everyone likes to bring up, well, that's not fair. Football is a team sport. You are correct. I am with you. It is a team sport. It is not a singular sport where one person wins the game. That argument is factual, but the problem is that we are comparing it to the most important position in the game of football, which is the quarterback. We can't sit there and ignore what we've seen. We can't sit there and ignore that Florida was going head-to-head with Florida State with Rodemaker in. We can't sit there and ignore what we saw just in this ACC championship game with Florida State and Louisville. Their defense won them that game. Great defense. Some people will say, well, it doesn't matter how you win. You can win by 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 30 points. The win is all that matters. I agree again. You're right. You're right. It does not matter technically how a team wins as long as they win. The question you have to start asking yourself is, though, is there a doubt that this team could hold up without their starting quarterback against these other teams? That is the part where I need everyone to be honest with themselves when saying all these things about what the committee did right or wrong. Because I'm going to be honest, I don't believe that the committee started watching football till 2 weeks ago. They finally watched football, because if we all watched what we saw this weekend, championship weekend, I don't think anyone is looking at me confidently and saying with their heart, with their chest, and their conviction, Florida State fans included, I think that this team without Jordan Travis could beat Michigan. Are you really saying that? I don't think so. I think this team could beat Texas. I think this team could beat Washington. You're not saying that, which is what the committee essentially came to the conclusion of. I'm going to pass around this sheet to everyone. You give me your two untouchables. Those two untouchables were Michigan and Washington. Cool. They're dead set. They're locked. And keep in mind, they made Washington prove themselves again during this weekend because everyone had Oregon winning. They put Oregon at 5 for a reason. I'm going to tell you a secret, and listen to me when I say it. What if I told you that the committee actually was hoping that Washington lost, Oregon won, and that Georgia won? Hear me when I say this. I wholeheartedly believe that the committee went into the championship weekend the week prior when they made their rankings. They had Florida State at 4 for a reason. They said it had nothing to do with injury, but more that Washington played very well and it impressed them. They put them at 3. Okay. The conversation that everyone has to keep into effect, right? If we're going to sit here and say, man, they did Florida State wrong, what I would say to you is that they set them up for failure to begin with. They put Oregon at 5 with the hopes, oh, we're going to get a rematch. We think Oregon's the better team. They're winning by big margins. Anyone who's been watching Oregon knows that their secondary is real shaky at times. I had Washington going into that game. I felt like they were the stronger team. It's harder to beat a team twice. Everyone's sold on Oregon. They put all their chips. Oregon's going to beat Washington, and Georgia's going to beat Alabama. That's what the committee wanted and was hoping. Their worst nightmare happened because it didn't go how they expected. They wanted Oregon to beat Washington and get Washington out of there. Oregon was going to be in the college football playoff. They wanted Georgia to continue winning. Georgia would have stayed. I wholeheartedly believe that we would have been looking at a ranking if Oregon beats Washington and Georgia finishes the mission and remains 1. It would have been Georgia, Michigan, Florida State, Oregon. I'm telling you, everyone's upset at the committee, but it all fell on if other people could finish the job. And I really think that they were dictating everything off of this Georgia-Alabama game. Again, they put all their trust that Georgia was going to win. Okay, they stay undefeated. Boom, perfect. Washington's undefeated. Boom, perfect. Oh, we got Florida State. Got to put them in. Michigan's undefeated. It's a different conversation. But because they lost against Alabama, and because the committee did not do their due diligence throughout the season to bump Alabama up as they were winning, they remained them at 8. Where a big jump like this happens and everyone's like, wait a minute, how'd you just jump them up 4 whole spots? You haven't moved them in the last 4 weeks. A lot of this is more so at the fault of the committee of not doing their due diligence of watching football, considering the eye test, considering resume, considering strength of schedule, strength of record, all of these things. They just went off of what they thought, which was preference. They weren't really sitting here watching and saying, wait a minute, some of these teams, I always said that I didn't understand how Ohio State loses to Michigan. They're ranked 2. They lose to Michigan, and they only get dropped to 6. I didn't understand that. That's why I say the committee put people in position to fail to begin with. The rankings after Ohio State lost should have been Oregon 5, Texas 6, Alabama 7. Because then if all this happens, it's a little bit more justification. It's like, okay, well, they moved up last week. Also, people have to put into effect, and I get that we love to say what's fair and what's not, and it's all of these things. They are looking for the best product on the field. I do believe when you look at last year, them letting TCU in, that was a big argument. TCU has to be in. TCU has to be in. The committee listened. They said, you know what, you're right. We're going to work in fairness. Fairness and justice of the football world. Records matter. We're putting them in. Okay. The score ends up being 65-7 in the national championship game, and Georgia wins. I think that was in the back of the committee's mind again. Like, we've done the fairness and like the justice part before with the wins and losses, and then the ending product was this abysmal of a score. I don't know if we can have that again. I do believe that was in the back of their mind. Some people are going to say, well, I think there's SEC bias. Yes. I think everyone still looks at the SEC as a superior conference. People are looking at Texas and say, well, y'all are finna move over there. It has to be the best conference. It was going to be hard for the committee to deny Alabama when they beat Georgia. That was their worst nightmare. Alabama, please don't beat Georgia. That's what they were praying for. The committee knew it. They were like, please don't. Because if y'all beat them, we're going to have to make some really tough decisions that we really didn't want to make last week. And now we're going to be forced to look like the bad guys. Because they didn't want to have Florida State at 4 when they made the rankings last week. But they didn't want to come out right and say, we're going to take them out because we don't actually think they're that good anymore without Jordan Travis. It put them in the worst position to be the bad guys, to be the villains. And they had to accept that role. If we're going to put the 4 best teams, not the 4 most deserving, those are 2 different perspectives. The most deserving, yes, Florida State's in there. They're undefeated. They're the most deserving. Some people might argue and say, well, Georgia's more deserving. They won recently. They are a 29-game win streak. They're more deserving. Everyone can say who's more deserving, right? But if it's about the 4 best teams, can you confidently look at me and say, Florida State goes head-to-head with Michigan right now, I'm taking them. Everyone's looking at that Michigan-Alabama game and saying, ooh, I got Alabama. So if we're looking at the matchup and saying to ourselves, I'm going with the 4 here. Why is everyone upset that Florida State's not 4? If we're only strictly talking football in the sense of that, Michigan was ready to have Florida State. You saw the reaction of them when they saw who was 4. It was quiet. It was crickets. Everybody kind of looking at each other like, that wasn't supposed to go how that was supposed to be. We were supposed to have a Florida State team with a 2nd-string quarterback and a 3rd-string quarterback. This wasn't it. Oh, now we got to play. Oh. The eye test comes into play. You can't deny what Alabama's doing. You can't deny that. This is a whole different team than when they lost against Texas, but that loss still stands. I can't sit there and negate that. Texas is playing some good ball. Everyone's been kind of saying, I got to see some more from them. I agree. They put a whooping on Oklahoma State. Oh, all conversation ceased. They're in. But they've struggled. They're a different team. Not as dominant, but they're still getting wins. It's so many different perspectives to this. But there's always has to be the core and the central focus, which in the question will remain. Are these the 4 best teams? Some people will say, well, no, I don't think so. Georgia should be in there. That's a good argument. But if we're talking about the 4 best teams, the best, not deserving, the best. Those 2 things are not the same. You could be the best and sometimes not be deserving of that spot. You can also be deserving and not be the best. And that sounds like a huge contradiction, right? To everything we're taught as children. You work hard. You trust the process. The results will come. Control what you can control. You reap what you sow, right? Florida State sowed good seeds of hard work, of dedication, of an undefeated season. But they didn't reap fairness in this. And it makes you wonder, is the college football product not a good product? Is it not if we're not rewarding teams for doing what's on the field? Or do you have to look at it and say, let me take fairness out and let me just go to football? Is this team without Jordan Travis? Are they the team? Could they win a national championship? Could they beat? It's a team sport. It doesn't take one person, because if we're sitting here putting that much emphasis on Jordan Travis, he needs to be a Heisman finalist. That's another conversation. If we're putting all this emphasis on one person, one player's injury, which sucks because now he's blaming himself as for this. And when I say that I hate that Jordan Travis is blaming himself, it's so sad that he's putting this on him, that is why they are not in the college football playoff. He ended up putting out a tweet saying how he felt. And he says, devastated, heartbroken, and so much disbelief right now. I wish my leg broke earlier in the season so y'all could see this team is much more than the quarterback. I thought results matter. 13-0, and this roster matches up across any team in those top 4 rankings. I am so sorry. Go Noles. That's heavy. That's hard to sit there and just ignore what he just said, because in his mind, this team is better and is just as good if I'm not out there. But because of this injury, I wish I would have got injured earlier so you guys could see this. But then it brings me to what I keep kind of going back to, which is, if we're putting this much emphasis on him, he should be in the Heisman conversation then. If we're going to say he's that important, which he is, there's a lot of contradictions to the argument, but I always go back to saying, if the committee would have did right throughout the last 3-4 weeks, I don't think that this is the outrage everyone would have if they would have eased themselves into this decision. They waited till the last possible minute because they put all their trust in Oregon and Georgia to get the job done. They were going to put Florida State in there. Everyone's saying that they don't think Florida State would have been in there if Georgia won. I don't agree with that. I think Florida State would have been in there if Georgia wins. But because Georgia lost, it forced them to have to look at these one-loss teams with a different matrix of when comparing it to the undefeated team of Florida State. Because in their mind, this Florida State team is undefeated, but they lost a big piece. So in our mind, that is a loss in a different column. These other teams kind of are a little bit healthier. You know, Alabama lost Kool-Aid McKinstry in the game. Texas has some injuries. All these things, right? But it's not the quarterback, though. It's a hard conversation and a tough one. But I think people have to understand it's football. It's football at the end of the day. You know, it's hard. I'm on the side of what I've seen throughout championship weekend, what I've seen throughout the weeks. I'm okay with the top 4 that are in there, if you ask me. I am. I hate that Florida State does get the bad end of the stick. I do. It sucks that they got screwed. Like, it does. It really does. But I'm also going to tell you something that I think the committee is trying to do in a weird way, which is kind of funny. Because they put Florida State at 5 and Georgia at 6, they're about to try to justify what they did. In their minds, they're saying, okay, everyone's mad. We'll take the hits. We're the villain. Da-da-da-da-da. You're telling us that Florida State's still one of the better teams. Okay, let's see. We're going to have them face against Georgia, who we and everyone else still considers a top team in college football. Arguably in the top 4, even with that one loss. We still consider them that. Y'all are telling me that it's not a one-man show. It's a team sport. Okay, let's put Florida State up to the test. Because I'm telling you right now, if Georgia beats Florida State, especially in a dominant fashion, everyone's going to look at the committee and say, they were right. They were right. Because think about this. If Georgia beats Florida State, but the number 4 spot went to Alabama, who beat Georgia, The justification is made right there. Oh, well, we put the right team then. Because the argument was, the 4th spot was between Florida State and Alabama. And they said, we think Alabama's playing better ball right now. We saw what they did against the number 1 team. They're the SEC champs. How can we deny them they're in? What they're hoping for is a justification for everyone to say, all right, they were right. They were right. This was the better decision. Yeah. But Florida State has the chance to do the funniest thing. The biggest FU to the committee by beating Georgia. Let Florida State beat Georgia and invalidate the committee completely. It's going to be a conversation. Florida State goes out there and beats Georgia with their 2nd string quarterback. And they're looking at the committee like, oh, this who you brought out? Oh, okay. We just beat them. This is who you wanted to make the deciding factor of who beat them. Well, we just beat them. Now what's the excuse? Now what's the conversation? It's interesting the position that the committee is in. Like I've said before, if they would have did right the last 3-4 weeks and eased this decision in there, I think this is a totally different conversation. But it was so abrupt. It had to be abrupt. Like you waited until the most pivotal week of college football to make these hard decisions that you kind of should have made throughout the last few weeks, or at least starting when Jordan Travis got hurt. And now here we are. I will say this. I think the college football playoff is going to be really good. I wish we would have had like an 18 playoff this year, but we're going to 12 next year, which I think is going to be good. Everyone has their feelings about it, but I'm like, you see what we're going through right now. We're going to need more spots. We're going to need more football, because the whole purpose is that you want these teams to prove themselves, and that's what we're about to have. So I'm excited for the 12-team playoff. Out of that Michigan-Alabama game, it's going to be a good one. It's to give Alabama defensively a month to game plan for J.J. McCarthy and Michigan. They got their coach back. They got a run game. Oh, man, it's going to be good. You look at Washington, Texas. Ooh, I'm telling you, it will not disappoint, those games. Then you got Florida State, Georgia. That's going to bring some views, I'm telling you. And, of course, they're looking at ratings because it's money. Of course. That has something to do with the conversation always. But most of the time, ratings will always be good if there are really great teams playing and great matchups. And that's what we're about to have. So I would love to hear how you feel about the college football playoff. Put in the comments how you see it. Do you feel like Florida State is one of the best teams in college football, the top 4, even without Jordan Travis? I know a lot of people are comparing it to 2014 with Ohio State and Cordell Jones, and that's a whole different system of how they did rankings in playoffs back then, and also just a different situation. It's just not the same. I'm telling you, it's not. Like, even some people are saying, well, what if Alabama had their 2nd string quarterback? Would this be a conversation? Well, history's on Alabama's side, because look at what happened when they had Tua and Jalen Hurts. Like, history's on their side that their backups are still essentially really good. So, like, those aren't good comparisons. I know everyone's trying to do that, but it's not great comparisons when you saw the product against Florida and said, this doesn't look great with your 2nd string quarterback. Then you saw the product with Louisville, and it's like, ooh, this really doesn't look too promising with your 3rd string quarterback. So tell me what you think. How do you see all this? Do you think the College Football Playoff Committee got it right finally? Do you think, is it about the best teams, or is it about the best deserving? Which is it? Which perspective should we be looking at? As the committee should have looked at, as fans should have looked at? How should it be? Who do you got winning? Do you got Michigan or Bama? Do you got Washington, Texas? And then you got Florida State, Ohio State. Out of those 3 games, who you got, and who's your prediction to get to the national championship game? I tell you, college football is undefeated. One of the best things to have at this time. It's always great when we get to this point of the season. So I'm excited to see everything that's going to happen, because it's going to be good. That's it, guys. I told you this episode was strictly about college football playoff final rankings, how I saw everything, the perspective, and kind of how I feel like they did get it right in a sense. But let me know how you feel in the comments. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share on all platforms. Let me see your perspective. Who's your team? What did you think was right or wrong in this? And how do you see this all unfolding when it's all said and done? And who's going to end up probably being the national champions? I definitely want to hear it. I appreciate you guys every week for tuning in and taking time out of your day to just hear me talk some ball. It's always appreciative. I love it. I am grateful for you guys. Thank you so much every week for tuning in. And I will be seeing you guys next week.